Hello and welcome to this video on the 0 point oscillator from SSF, or steady state fit. This is an analog oscillator, but far from your standard analog oscillator and way beyond your typical through zero FM oscillator too. Let's check out what's to come before we get into it. Before we get into it, I'll say right off the bat, there is a timing index for you to skip through this video as you see fit. It is a long, in-depth demo with lots to learn, lots of features to go through, and it'd be a real injustice to try and time limit this and just knock out a quick demo. Not that ever doing any kind of demo can be knocked out quickly, but this is a particularly long one, so do skip around as you see fit with that timing index on screen or with the links in the description. So the ZPO, or ZPO, or 0 point oscillator, has all your standard oscillator features. Coarse and fine tune, it will go to LFO modes or be switched into a lock tuning with a trimmer so you can lock that pitch control and just get your finer control handy in a live case where you maybe don't want to knock that pitch control. Got lots of waveform outputs, your standard analog waves like sine, triangle, pulse and saw. We also have a sub that can be -1 or -2 octaves. We get an up saw, which is an octave up saw wave, a rip saw, which is a blend of the sub and upwards and downward facing ramps, and an even harmonic wave too. We have 3 additional morphing waveform outs, an A output, which will morph between pulse, saw, triangle and inverted sine. Same there on the B output, and a morph out where we can over CV. We can CV A and B as well, by the way. Over CV morph between A and B. So if you didn't want to morph from pulse to sine going through these other waves, you could go pulse, sine, and morph between them. The PWM has a normal edge-based pulse width modulation, a center and a hybrid pulse width modulation, addressable via CV. We can sync volt per octave, linear FM, exponential FM, and that's where the kind of standard stuff, not that waveform morphing and additional waveforms are standard, but that's where the kind of standard stuff goes, and we get into what makes the ZPO unique. Thank you for Andrew at SSF for sponsoring this video. By sponsoring this content, he has funded me making this demo video. The 0 point oscillator is unique because of this 0 point. On certain waveforms, if you were to just plug in, say, the sine, this simply acts like a bipolar amplifier. It's like a VCA, full level to no level, and then inverting round. So you could do tremolo-like effects or plug envelopes in there. However, when we do this at audio rates, it works like a ring modulator, a thru zero AM or TZAM thru zero bipolar amplifier. So we can ring modulate, and where this becomes really unique is the merging of thru zero FM and thru zero amplitude control. We've got this thru zero mod bus, which can be off, set to all, linear or exponential. And what happens when we do that is if we say flick to all, what we plug into linear, FM and exponential will merge into this 0 point and give us that merging of AM and FM through 0. Because we can also modulate the 0 point, it's constantly dynamic and pitch doesn't change. So we could add some nice through 0 linear FM, tune that up, and then play around with additional audio rates or sub-audio LFOs, envelopes, sequences or random into the 0 point. And it's really the merging of all those through 0 technologies that make the 0 point special. Andrew from Steady State Fate has explained all this really nicely on the website, so I'll link that in the description. There's going to be lots of patches in this video, but I'm going to give you little palette cleansers, a little amuse-bouche, as it were, in between all the descriptive talking points. So you'll get some little snippets of musical patches without any explanation as a little palette cleanser. So here we'll take a look at the available waveforms on the 0 Point Oscillator. And we'll start with a sine. Nice clean sine, it's tuned quite low as you can hear. Triangle. Saw wave. Pulse with 3 types of PWM. A output with the wave A, which morphs between the pulse at whatever pulse width, saw, triangle and an inverted sine. Just to give us a more interesting modulation between the triangle and the sine. As we come over to this side, we have a sub at -1 octave or -2. It's obviously really deep there. An even waveform. An upsaw, which is an octave up compared to the main saw, and a ripsaw, which is a mixture of the sub and upward and downward facing ramp waves. We also have the B output, which again morphs between those same waveforms, pulse, saw, triangle, inverted sine, and we have a morph output, which lets you morph between 2 selected waves on there. So morph AB, take us from the pulse to the triangle. And both waveform morphs and morph AB are addressable via CV. So they're the waveforms. We'll of course be hearing lots of them in this video, so let's move on. So here we'll check out all the morphing on the ZPO. All the morphs. The A output with its wave morphing, the B output with its wave morphing, and the actual morph out, the morph AB. So you'll see there, wave A is changing, wave B is changing, and the AB fading between them is changing, all at different fluctuating random rates. So here we're exploring audio rate morph modulation for those waveform morphing outputs. I thought I'd do this in stereo. So this is the A output. That's the green trace on data there. This is the B output. I have 2 sine waves coming in to modulate these. So if I put them both on in stereo, I'm going to turn up this modulation. You can hear it's nice just to get soft overtones without much depth of modulation. I'm just turning up an external attenuator here. Then with a little bit of that left in, let's turn up the B audio rate morphing. Turning them both down, or off rather, added some beef with the sub output here. That mono down the center and these panned hard left and right gives a really thick, lovely signal. Of course, make sure you're listening stereo, headphones, decent speakers, all the usual stuff. But together, even without any modulation, nice big wave. Adding some modulation in will be quite subtle. Lots of thick, nice, almost unison vibes with this one not actually being quite in tune with its modulator. Again, syncing the 0 point or syncing the modulation source would snap things in harmoniously and musically, but I like this uneasiness of not quite in sync modulation. The extra bonus icing on the cake is of course this 0 point modulation. So here's an LFO into 0 points. Play with the rate of the LFO. Adjust the modulation of audio rate waveform morphing again. So here's a lovely warm fuzzy patch with 0 point modulation. Now this exactly as is can also work when we go into the FM inputs with this through 0 mod bus. If I turn this into all, even with the FM down, we get the same effect with the addition of being able to add this FM. Top of the 0 point modulation. But we'll come back and explore that later and stick with 0 point modulation. This is through 0 amplitude modulation. If I turn my modulators off, we're coming out of the morph output with a triangle wave. You can see this gives us control, flipping the phase or negatively amplifying the wave. So if I was to add an LFO, we simply get tremolo-like effects that go through 0. With a saw wave, for example, a little bit more obvious because we can see the shape. We can actually go past full negative gain and get this kink in the wave, which I really like as this additional little harmonic bump to a normal saw wave. You can see inverted saw through the 0 point to a downward saw. And because of the wave shapes being different, we also get an interesting square in between. So with an LFO coming in, it's almost like a saw square hybrid PWM-like tone. It's not pulse width modulation at all, but tonally it's like a shifting kind of ramp PWM in a weird way. That's how I'd approach it in practice anyway. Sticking with a triangle, let's add some audio rate modulation to the 0 point. These 4 cables are all outputs from the stereo dipole. Here's a single oscillating filter. And we can change that 0 point, which brings more of that fundamental low end in. Do that on, say, a triangle. A sine. a dipole output, which is 2 oscillating sines. And keeping these in sync would be a really nice thing to do. We'll explore that later in the video, and syncing your sources for FM or 0 point modulation keeps things harmonic and musical. But I like this warm kind of beating that we're getting by not syncing my sources here. Obviously that would be much richer and thicker on, say, a saw or a pulse. Stick with sine, go to another single pole. Just going to fine tune this a little bit. Just getting that movement in the modulation. Let's try it on a saw. Really lovely modulation. And then the other dipole, so this is 2 oscillating filters again. And again, mixing this with, say, an LFO as well as this audio rate source. There's lots of great ring mod and TZAM through 0 AM to explore. So here we'll explore the FM, linear, exponential, this 0 point, and this through 0 option that we have for all inputs, exponential or linear or none of those FM ins relating to the 0 point. Now here's a triangle wave with an envelope into the 0 point. And I want to straight away get this to be dynamic, just to get this point across that this dynamic modulation doesn't change pitch. So it can be very dynamic with how we modulate the depth of modulation. And you can hear there, this triangle wave that we're coming out of is simply like a VCA at this point. It's just coming up and down in level. I had my modulation source synced, which is this simple analog oscillator here, but taking a sine wave into, say, the linear FM, I'm going to make the through 0 affect everything. Even with linear FM down, this input, because of the through 0 mod, will start to affect the 0 point. Take this out for a second. Just fine-tuning my modulation there. Because this is through 0 amplitude modulation, like a bipolar VCA, we get a nice ring mod-like tone. That wouldn't pass through if I didn't have that set to linear, because that's the input, or all, which will affect linear and exponential. But that manual 0 point there still gives us kind of depth of modulation control relating to how these pass into this through 0 bus. Adding some actual FM. Tune this up a bit. And again, modulating 0 point. We don't get pitch drifts with through 0 linear FM and through 0 amplitude modulation. Getting the envelope back into 0 point. Dynamic, FM and AM. Works the same way with the exponential in. Let's leave this up full. Because this is set to all, straight away it goes into the 0 point. And at this point, let's sync it. Let's take that sub back out and sync my modulation source. Kind of locks that in there really nicely. Again, modulating the 0 point. LFOs, more audio, anything you want to throw in, it's going to keep a stable pitch. Let's actually add some exponential FM. us off. It's just simply exponential FM. And again, even without the through 0 on, we can tune up a nice FM there on the exponential and use the 0 point as the through 0 AM, TZAM or ring mod, with an envelope or another source to play around with the depth of modulation. It keeps things musical and harmonious. Now that is some crazy PWM. I imagine even the likes of Nick Bat might not have seen before. The two things happening outside of what you can see here is me muting this signal on mute on. It's a bit easy for me to talk over. And I have an external attenuator feeding this PWM input. PWM is coming from an oscillating stereo dipole, bringing the sound back in. I'll just drop that attenuator down to 0, and we're left with our square wave. We've got 3 modes of operating. Edge-based PWM is our standard pulse width modulation. As we've seen before. Center breaks this out almost into like stair-step pyramid-like waves. Great tune down low. And then a hybrid of the two. Sticking with hybrid, this tune down low, it's like an LFO. Well, it is an LFO. Let's turn up the PWM on my external attenuator. That's the hybrid. That's the edge. Bring the LFO up a little bit. Center. That bit richer. Now this does work over the morph outputs as well, so if I was to come out of, say, morph A instead of the pulse control, set that to pulse. So you can have this really thick morphing pulse that's blended almost further round to a saw and get more interesting shapes that way too. Let's take this up into audio rates, sticking with just the pulse, and we'll go back to the edge. And I love audio rate PWM. I'm just playing with the attenuator here again. Let's try that on center. Tune a little higher. And again, I'm moving this external attenuator between this modulating PWM. Let's try hybrid. So explore PWM, sub-audio rates, envelopes, LFOs, random modulation, explore it well wave morphing, and certainly audio rate the pulse width. There's a lot of great overtones in there that just push this beyond the already massive things with the ring mod through ZPO AM that it does already. With all the different wave shapes on board and all the modulation options on the 0 point oscillator, it makes for a fantastic shapeable, modulatable, animatable LFO, hence getting some interesting LFO modulation. This is just modulating a bandpass filter, and there's a splash of reverb and a little bit of a simple demo, simple patch. So let's pull the modulation here, and we'll go through some of these wave shapes. Start with triangle. It's nice that 0 point is ultimately like a level control. It saves needing external attenuation for this modulation. Saw wave. Sine. Then we have these more unique versions of saw waves, the rip saw. See a rather unique waveform, some nice hard edges and some nice rising or falling sections as well. The up saw, which is twice the rate of the normal saw, so get familiar with this. Even waveform, kind of like a saw sine hybrid. Sub is a square 1 octave or 2 octaves lower than the main pulse, and of course we can use the morph outputs to morph and shape as we see fit. So if I start to modulate this, we could of course sync this, use multiple outputs at the same time, use linear FM and exponential FM, make that through 0. There's a whole range of things we can do. It makes for a nice comprehensive, multi-output, very animatable LFO. So here we're taking a look at sync, and the ZPO has a unique circuit that will sync to any waveform. Here I'm syncing to the pulse, but we could try triangle, sine, saw, and it would sync nicely. We're looking at the output waveform there, which again, going through mute on for a mute. And I'll remove this patch and we'll start to explore sync. Getting rid of the exponential FM, that was a little envelope, giving us a kind of whip-like animation to the start of each note. This is sequenced. I'm going to leave that in, and because we're syncing the core of the oscillator circuit, it affects all the waveforms. This has been the sine. Let's try triangle, saw, pulse, which is really affected by its pulse width. Rip saw, up saw, even, and the sub. We'll stick with the triangle, and what's happening here is this oscillator, consider this our modulator, is syncing this one to reset the waveform each time this waveform peaks. So even though I can move the tuning here, you can hear it's more of a kind of tonal shift while retaining the same sense of tuned pitch, which comes from this. If we sync at a faster rate than this goes at, you can see we lose a lot of the waveform because it doesn't have time to go through its full cycle of the wave. If this is lower in pitch than the actual ZPO, you can see we do somewhat get cycles of the wave. So sweeping the pitch while it's synced. Really lovely thing. It's nice to get, say, LFOs into the FM to get this sync moving around for lead tones. Really common on pulses. Again, sticking with the triangle. More unique sound, a bit less common. Let's get a sequence back into the ZPO. So I often wonder why tremolo is a really overlooked effect in a modular system. You play guitar, if you don't use it, you've likely seen or maybe even tried tremolo at some point, simply fading the volume of something up and down repetitively with a basic LFO. And my patch here is a sine out of the 0 point oscillator into muton, simple VCA, into some rather noisy reverb. If you can hear a bit of noise, it's from that effects processor, by the way. And an envelope controlling the level on muton. So press down a note. The level rises in the VCA, standard stuff, but with an LFO to 0 point, and that in the middle, this acts like another VCA. So chaining VCAs, and we could do that with 2 channels, but why when I've got the 0.3? I can use an LFO. Control the level. The LFO is tracking the pitch, so you can hear as I go up those octaves, the pitch rises and the LFO rate rises too. So if nothing else, this patch is to encourage you to play around with tremolo-like effects in your modular system. And if you're not using the 0 point for some tasty audio rate stuff and playing around with the thru 0 mod bus, try some LFOs or envelopes. We'll play around with additional level control by using it on the ZPO and on your other modules downstream too. Here I'm creating a big stereo drone with the 0 point oscillator into muton and lots of free running drifting oscillators controlling their levels. Now I've tried to cable this in a way that makes sense. The blue outputs on the ZPO or ZPO go into these 4 ins, and then this output is going into data so we can see it, and that's panned hard left. If I mute this channel, for example, you can hear these are all on the left. Pink outputs gone to this side, and they're panned hard right. Again, first going into data so we can see it. The saw wave there is a direct out just as a reference. Because this mixes the 4 waves together, I get a mix of the 4 blue outs and the 4 pink outs, hard left and right. And the green LEDs control the right side, or rather the green cables, and the yellow cables control this side. I do have some effects which I'll remove. And there's our stereo drone of ZPO waves into VCAs that mix together and just fading waves in differently. I'm modulating pulse width, a little bit of FM, and just a slow rise and fall in pitch, and the morphing of the 2 morph outs as well. With audio coming in, and this is a resonant filter, a resonating dipole output, I've got a sequence coming in, and by lowering the 0 point, which is what it's modulating, I can start to bring in this sequenced audio rate modulation as well. Going from drone to sequence. So we saw earlier that we have a sub-output running at -2 octaves or -1 octave relating to our bass pitch. So what I've done here, and I'll remove the envelopes first, I have my main pulse, and these are just mixing through mute on here. My sub, let's drop that back to -2. Separation works really well there, and the upsaw. Octave upsaw, main pulse, and sub. And by treating these differently, although here they're mixed for the sake of the start of this example, we can start to create a hell of a lot of kind of synthesis and sound world that seems like way more than one basic synth patch going on. So the upsaw here is triggered just by 16th notes with an envelope. The main pulse is my main gate rhythm. And a less frequent pattern for the sub. And together, we can hear these different octaves firing in with their different rhythmic envelopes. Now, let's patch these off differently. And as if by magic, this big open world of seemingly more than one synth playing at once appears. So again, by treating these all differently, nice fixed squelchy bass sound from the sub, pulse pan slightly right with a bit of delay, tight envelope again playing a different rhythm to the other two, and this reverb. We've got this 3-part moving sound world that is really just one oscillator, and it sounds like many more synths at the same time. So here we've turned the 0 Point Oscillator into a weird drum kit. Some of you that watch a lot of my videos may know I've done this before, and I like turning single sound sources into full weird drum kits. Now, before we get into it, there's a few nice things we can do with this, such as use noise to sync it. Play with the envelope into the 0 point. Tons of mixing, tons of VCAs, tons of other things going on, but every sound you hear, there are some that are modulators, audio sources that is, comes from the 0 point. Now this channel is the sub output, and I have an envelope going into exponential FM and this VCA to give me that bit of a kick. Here's my snare, and what happens at the same time is another VCA channel takes noise at its input, fires that into the volt per octave and the PWM, and this is the pulse out. Triangle out. There's no CV of that VCA, it's just taking that to mix in on the mute on there. So it's a bit of a mix of everything going on, but add that sub kick, the noise hit on that pulse, a clicky little octave up saw, playing around with 0 point, nice droney bass kind of vibe. Sync to noise again. And there's our ZPO, ZPO drum kit. So here we're exploring the space between sines and triangles. Now Andrew at SSF talks about why he's used an inverted sine. I'll copy that and put it on screen. But while you're reading that, I'm just going to add some LFO modulation to the wave shape to go between the triangle and the inverted sine. I'm just externally attenuating this LFO. It's the dipole oscillating a little bit faster. And it's just this really interesting space that I wanted to make sure I got into the video. Tremolo-like effects. Coming up to audio rates here. Just this interesting space to live in and something that I thought could be overlooked, so I wanted to make sure I got into the video. Playing a sequence into both ZPO and the modulating oscillating filter. Nice overtones and harmonics, but it's not bright, it's not harsh. It's got this nice kind of woody warmth to it. So here's a patch where I'm going to look at stacking, simply mixing waveforms and using the unique different outputs to your standard analog waves to create some nice new tones. First, let me play around. So I'm taking different waveform outs here into muton and mixing them into the dipole, just muting my output there. Here's the ripsaw. A unique wave that's kind of hollow, like a pulse somehow. It's got that kind of buzzy saw-like tone too. Here's the sub. And the upsaw, octave up. So simply mixing them these really big, thick, fat mixes of oscillator sound into this very heavily modulated dipole. One other little trick for this patch, if I drop my 0 point, because not every wave is affected the same, that becomes a variable parameter rather than just muting these sounds in and out. But adding in some audio rate modulation that I can mute on and off here. Really gritty, high kind of distorted vibe. Almost like a digital overtone. So this patch is a bit of an extension from one of the kind of in-between little palette cleanser patches that I haven't talked through. I was making a kick, if I do some weird sequence dynamic FM type stuff as well. Now muting those, removing this 0 point modulation. Simply got kick drum. This would go through a VCA if I wanted to tidy it up, but I can cut it out and add a kind of weirdly modulated envelope to 0 point. Getting these weird kind of fuzzy swells. Quite odd, but I liked it. And then adding another sequenced audio rate source. This is the stereo dipole just oscillating. I'm sequencing the sound in and out. The dipole itself is being pitch sequenced, and this is coming into the morphing between triangle on one side and sine on the other. As it's at audio rates, it's imparting these little weird high-end tones. And then this modulation is another oscillator, again being sequenced, but super short and snappy, and just injecting itself into the linear FM, which is going through the through zero bus, so it's affecting the 0 point as well. So together, weird fuzzy kick drum low end thing and glitchy FM oddness. I quite liked it, so I'd end the video with this patch. Support my work on patreon.com/DivKid. Hit like, subscribe, leave a comment. Any questions, do just ask. That's the 0 point oscillator from Steady State Fate. I'll see you next time.